Let's take a look at the CIA Triad now. CIA stands for Confidentiality, Integrity, and Availability. Now, before I talk about the CIA Triad, let us understand what we mean by the term asset. Assets are our data or items that require security. As per a leading cloud provider, data centers are made up of various physical and virtual components, each of which is referred to as an asset. Data refers to data in all forms, that is, data at rest on a drive, data in motion between two systems, or even data that is printed on a piece of paper. Our assets also include systems and infrastructure components used to process or store such data. We need to balance confidentiality, integrity, and availability depending on the values of our assets and business requirements. We will cover assets and asset values in more details later. For now, let's get back to the CIA Triad. Let us now discuss the CIA Triad in the context of information security. Confidentiality. Only authorized entities have access to the data so that unauthorized entities cannot access the data. Confidentiality can be achieved through various methods like encryption at rest or encryption in motion. Examples of encryption in motion include HTTPS connections and SFTP connections. Now, think of a situation where a server has a zero-day vulnerability. Could that breach the confidentiality of the data? A zero-day vulnerability is something that is only known to the threat actors and previously unknown to the developers. In other words, we do not have a patch for a zero-day vulnerability. We could potentially mitigate zero-day vulnerabilities, like SQL injections, for example, using web application firewalls. Even though the application developer might not know about a probable zero-day SQL injection vulnerability, a web application firewall might still be able to block the request before it reaches the application. Now, if a zero-day vulnerability is exploited resulting in the adversary gaining confidential information, then that would breach the confidentiality of the data. Do you remember the Equifax data breach incident? It was probably not a zero-day vulnerability at the time of the exploit. Without going into the exact numbers, the private records of around 150 million people were compromised in the breach, and the settlement included up to $425 million to help people affected by the data breach. In addition to financial damages, a data breach can also cause reputational damages to a company. So, confidentiality is extremely important. With that being said, let's talk about integrity. It is important to maintain the integrity of data and prevent unauthorized modifications to the data both at rest and in motion. For example, if an adversary injects data into a database, then the integrity of the data is compromised. Integrity can be achieved by encrypting the data at rest and in motion to avoid unauthorized modifications. Integrity of data at rest can be checked by using version controls and checksums. If we have offsite backups, we can compare the checksums of the backups to the original data to ensure that the integrity is maintained. Checksums are calculated on the contents of a file. If two files have different contents, then we should have different checksums. Let's see this in action now. We will now create a new file called integrity using the VI editor. Let me type something and save the file. Let's check the checksum of the file now. So the checksum is the large hexadecimal number starting with 3D. Let us now change the contents of the file. If we check the checksum now, it has changed. So as you can see that the checksum changed when we changed the contents of the file. Having said that, if two files with different contents have the same checksum, then we have a collision. A good strong checksum should not have collisions. Attacks to checksums could include things like the threat actor trying to compromise the integrity of the data in such a way that does not change the checksum. Older checksums like MD5 are not considered collision resistant. If we have a cryptographically strong hash, the probability of two arbitrary hashes colliding is extremely low, if not impossible under regular circumstances. Okay, let us now talk about availability. Authorized entities can access the data when and how they are authorized to do so in a reasonable amount of time as required. Availability can be achieved by implementing load balancers, DOS protection firewalls, redundant power supplies, etc. Remember, We need to balance the three legs of the CIA Triad depending on business requirements and asset values. For example, if an e-commerce website costs us $20,000 to ensure 99.99% availability and just $5,000 to ensure 99.9% availability, and we estimate that the downtime difference would lead to a sales revenue loss of only $100, we will most likely choose the cheaper $5,000 solution that offers 99.9% uptime. To put it simply, all solutions must be tailored to business requirements. If we have servers that host online public videos like tutorials, then availability is probably the most important. However, if we have confidential documents, then the confidentiality of the data is of higher importance. We might want to encrypt the confidential data, which might affect the data retrieval time. We need a balance based on the organization's requirements. Baselines have to be scoped and tailored to meet the organization's risk tolerance. A server storing social security numbers might need more attention to ensuring the confidentiality and integrity of the data, whereas for an e-commerce business, availability of the website might be more important. We will probably not want to spend $1,000 to protect $500 worth of assets unless there are other compelling factors. Okay, let's take a look at a few questions now. Bob backs up confidential data from his workstation on a USB drive and stores the drive in a safe located 50 miles away. There are no other copies of the data. The USB device and the workstation drives are encrypted using a one-time pad encryption method. We will cover one-time pads in more details in a different video. However, for now, remember that one-time pad encryption is mathematically unbreakable, unless of course you have the keys. So, both copies of the data are encrypted, and assuming that the keys are stored safely, we can say that he ensures the confidentiality of the data. Now he can run checksums on the backup copy and check it with the original data to ensure that the integrity of the data is maintained. And finally, if the original data is lost, he will most likely have the backup copy. So Bob maintains the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of the data. Hence, option number 5 is the best answer choice for the question. Let's take a look at the next question now. Which of the following could be seen as a fault-tolerant mechanism as a part of a business continuity plan? Now, storing backups and restoring backups after a failure are more of disaster recovery plans than business continuity plans, so we can strike out options 2 and 4. Now, relocating servers is obviously not the answer here. In RAID 10, we have 2 copies of the same data, so if a drive fails, there should be another replicated drive containing the same data, so option number 1 is the best answer choice for the question. Although software-defined storage is mostly used now instead of RAID, this question serves as an easy way to explain fault tolerance. So let's take a look at the next question now. Bob works for an infrastructure management company. He establishes a social media connection with an account that claims to belong to a colleague, Tom. Bob starts receiving suspicious messages from the account asking for work-related information. What could Bob do to verify the account's authenticity? Select the best option. Now, asking for confidential documents over social media is not secure, so we can strike out option number 1. Now, if we look at the question carefully, Bob wants to verify the account's authenticity. Reporting the account may not help Bob to verify the account's authenticity. With that being said, let's look at option number 2. Examining Tom's followers could potentially help Bob get an idea of the account's authenticity. So out of the 3 options here, option number 2 is the best answer choice for the question. Okay, it's time for the next question. Which aspect of the CIA Triad could data remanence potentially violate? Now, this is an important topic to know. Data remanence is the residual representation of digital data that remains after attempts have been made to erase the data. In other words, it could potentially violate the confidentiality of such data. So option number 1 is the best answer choice for the question. Let's look at the next question now. Which of the following could potentially breach the confidentiality of data? Let us go through the options one by one. Denial of service or DOS attacks try to compromise the availability of systems, so option 1 is not the answer here. Penetration testing is generally conducted by organizations to find the vulnerabilities in the systems. Before any penetration testing, rules of engagement are signed. In other words, penetration testing helps to determine the vulnerabilities. With that being said, let's talk about eavesdropping. Eavesdropping is the act of secretly listening to the private communications of others without their consent. So eavesdropping could potentially violate the confidentiality of data. Hence, option number 3 is the best answer choice for the question. Bob is the storage manager of a company. It turns out that the database server containing personal identifiable information and personal health information is running out of space. All records are encrypted using company-owned keys. What is the best solution that will help Bob to resolve the issue? Data has to be retained as per policies and legal requirements. Bob cannot just delete any data to free up storage. Now, since there are personal identifiable information and personal health information, the databases cannot be decrypted and stored just to free up space. Migrating the databases to the cloud is also not the immediate solution because the keys are company-owned. Before choosing any cloud provider, proper investigation must be made to ensure that the level of security provided by the cloud provider meets or exceeds the security standards that Bob's company offers to its own customers. So let's look at option number 4. Adding more disk space to the existing server seems to be the best solution here. So option number 4 is the best answer choice for the question. In terms of availability, which of the following would be the primary reason for not locating a disaster recovery site in the same city as the primary site? Let's go through the options. Most data centers generally have multiple network providers for redundancy and BGP routing. Some data centers share staff members across nearby facilities. However, you can still have separate staff members for nearby data centers. So option number 2 is not the reason for locating a disaster recovery site in a different city. Distributed denial of service attacks are network attacks, so the physical location of the server will have almost no impact. Now let's look at option 3. Disaster recovery sites should be located at a distance far enough for it not to be affected by the same disaster, for example, a flood or a storm. So it is the primary reason for not locating a disaster recovery site in the same city as the primary site. In addition, we could have completely different underground cables and network transit providers. So option number 3 is the best answer choice for the question. It is a bonus question and not directly related to the CIA Triad. What is the purpose of National Institute of Standards and Technology Special Publication 830? The purpose of Special Publication 830 is to provide guidance for conducting risk assessments of federal information systems and organizations. Risk assessments are part of an overall risk management process, providing senior management with the information needed to determine appropriate courses of action in response to identified risks. So option number 3 is the best answer choice for the question. We recently discussed the CIA Triad. Let us now see various methods that can help protect the confidentiality of data. Encryption at rest. It refers to encrypting the data at rest or while it is stored on a drive. We can encrypt entire drives or individual partitions. If an encrypted drive is stolen, the adversary may not be able to access the confidential data stored on the encrypted drive unless they have access to the key and the passphrase to activate the key. That's assuming, though, that the encryption is strong enough. Next, we have encryption in motion. Encryption in motion refers to encrypting the data while it is in transit between two systems. A common example is the HTTPS communication protocol that we use to browse websites. The communication is encrypted using TLS or transport layer security so that a third party cannot eavesdrop on the connection. Let's now talk about brute force attacks. A brute force attack is one where an adversary tries to log in repeatedly using different combinations of passwords in the hope that he or she would be able to guess the correct password. We should always use strong passwords to help protect against brute force attacks. With the advancement of computing power, more and more combinations of brute force attempts can be generated every second. We can use a system that only allows a certain number of login failures before the account is locked to discourage brute force attacks. We can also implement multi-factor authentication. We will talk more about MFA in the next video. The principle of least privilege refers to granting a user the minimum levels of access or permissions needed to perform his or her job roles. More privileges can then be granted on a case-by-case basis. For example, if you have a new system administrator in your team, You may only want to give him or her access to the systems he or she would manage rather than giving access to all servers. This balances usability, efficiency, and security. It helps limit unintended access and track who has access to what resources. Least privilege can help to contain the consequences of a login breach or in case an employee gets hostile. Cloud providers generally follow the principles of least privilege by default when a new account is created. Let's talk about privilege creep. Consider a scenario where a system administrator used to work for the IT department but has now moved to the finance department and gets the access privileges of the finance department. As per your company policies, the finance department employees should not have the level of access granted to the IT department. But this employee happens to have both levels of access because someone did not remember to revoke his previous level of access. Privilege creep is the gradual accumulation of access rights beyond what individuals need to do their jobs as a result of previous access rules not being removed. To prevent privilege creep, we need to ensure that there are policies in place to revoke previous levels of access whenever an employee changes his or her job role in the company. Let's take a look at the next question now. Bob recently moved from the finance department to the IT department. He was granted new permissions related to his new job role, but the old access permissions were not removed. Which of the following best describes the situation that occurred? Let's take a look at the answer options. A privilege escalation is a situation where the individual gains unauthorized access of elevated rights, permissions, entitlements, or privileges beyond what is assigned. In other words, it is a type of exploiting a system. So option number 2 is not the best answer for the question. Eavesdropping is the act of secretly listening to the communication between two systems. Eavesdropping may breach the confidentiality of information. Let's see option number 1 now. Privilege creep is the gradual accumulation of access rights beyond what individuals need to do their jobs as a result of previous access rules not being removed. This is exactly what happened here, and hence option number 1 is the best answer choice for the question. Let's now talk about ransomware. Ransomware is a type of malware where the adversary encrypts and locks the data of the victim and does not provide the key to unlock the encrypted data until a ransom is paid. Does this sound familiar to extortion? Ransomware is a modern version of the age-old crime of extortion, but with the advancement in internet connectivity, adversaries can now increase their reach and speed. Ransomware primarily targets the availability component of the CIA Triad. However, the adversary may also have access to confidential data, in which case the confidentiality and integrity of such data may also be compromised. Payments are generally collected using anonymous methods like cryptocurrency. Ransomware has become very common. Off-site backups should be taken regularly with the backup interval and number of restore points tailored to the specific needs and risk tolerance of the company. The 3-2-1 backup strategy states that you should have 3 copies of your data, number 1 being your production data, and 2 backup copies on 2 different types of media, with 1 copy off-site for disaster recovery. Off-site backups should be on completely different or isolated networks to help prevent the adversary from encrypting the backup copies. The 3-2-1 backup strategy is not a hard rule, though. As stated, the backup strategies of your organization should be dictated by the requirements and risk tolerance levels as laid down by the senior management. I want to say this once again, though. Regular off-site backups are extremely important. Let's take a look at the next question. Bob logs into his workstation and discovers he cannot access his files. A banner on the desktop reads, "Your drive is encrypted. You must pay 2 million CUSD in 72 hours to retrieve the key required to decrypt your drive. After 72 hours, the key will not be available anymore, and the data on your drive will be lost permanently." Which of the following options best describes the situation that has possibly taken place? Assume that CUSD is a form of cryptocurrency. Phishing is a technique for attempting to acquire sensitive data, such as credit card numbers, through a fraudulent solicitation in email or on a website, in which the perpetrator masquerades as a legitimate business or reputable person. Let's check the second option. Smishing is a combination of the terms SMS and phishing. Smishing is a form of phishing, but the channel of communication is SMS or text messages on mobile devices, so option numbers 1 and 2 can be ruled out for now. As for the third option, there is no immediate evidence of a hardware failure from the question. Ransomware is a type of malware where the adversary encrypts and locks the data of the victim and does not provide the key to unlock the encrypted data until a ransom is paid. Ransomware attacks may often create a sense of urgency, like in this question, for example. Bob has only 72 hours to retrieve his data. That is assuming that Bob does not have other offsite copies of his data. That takes me to re-emphasize the point that offsite backups are extremely important. Option number 4 is the best answer choice for this question. Let's look at the next question now. The first part of this question is the same as the last one, but now we want to know which aspect of the CIA Triad has been targeted. One can say that the adversary may have access to the data they are encrypting. If they do, then the confidentiality and potentially the integrity of the data can be compromised too if they alter the data. However, a ransomware attack generally targets the availability of data. It is important to read the question carefully for the exam. We have to select the best answer. So option number 3 is the best answer choice for the question. That takes us to the end of ransomware. Ransomware is widespread, and an organization must have proper risk controls in place to prevent and mitigate the consequences of cyber attacks. More questions and answers are available in the quizzes. If you found the video helpful, please consider subscribing to our YouTube channel and turn on notifications to get notified of more videos like this. If you have any questions, please let me know. Thank you, and I hope to see you in the next one.